for you to take away from tonight's presentation. Do not write resumes for every job you apply for. Kris, you said it better, but I just wanted to put some extra emphasis. This is something that so many job seekers worry and spend so much unnecessary time on. So you said it best, but I just wanted to just re-emphasize that fact.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of information tonight. I like to kind of start with this slide of what we would typically have as a resume checklist, just focusing your attention on the left-hand side with those check marks. Take a look right now. Think of your resume, or maybe you have it in front of you or can pull it up on your screen, and identify one or two of these areas that you know your resume needs a little bit of help with, right? So again, lots of good nuggets are going to be coming at you tonight. It's unrealistic to assume you're going to be able to execute every single thing that we say, because that's just not how training works. That's not how we could talk to the instructional designer. I know someone on here referenced that was their career path. We're just not likely to retain that level of information. But if you can focus in on one or two areas here that you're going to pay particular attention as I'm working through, then I guarantee you're going to walk away with a stronger resume than you started. So taking a look at this, sort of make a mental note. I know I really want to hone in and understand a better way to represent my experience, and probably my formatting can use some help, just as an example. Everybody got something or thinking about kind of where they're going to hone in their attention? Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk through these different pieces, and you'll notice that I'll spend more time on areas that are more important and kind of scan through some other areas that will hopefully be fairly straightforward. But first and foremost, we like to start nice and easy with a prominent header. Can anyone come off of mute and share with me what you notice is difference between the resume on the top, the header, excuse me, that's outlined in red there versus the header outlined in black below? Anything you notice?
The name is much more clear and descript and kind of draws your attention more.
Perfect. Yes, you can clearly see the name. What else?
Certifications
Space.
and education are up front.
Absolutely. Someone sharing their credentials. Someone said space.
You're
Yeah,
on.
no need to put your address in.
Thank you. Yes, we no longer need a residential address. That is not necessary on a modern resume. The three pieces of contact information we look for are your phone number, a single phone number. Do not make recruiters call multiple numbers. Nobody's going to do that. An email address that is professional sounding, and also your LinkedIn URL. I mentioned a little bit ago. We know people are going to check you out on LinkedIn. Make it really easy for them to do so. In Julie's case, she's also offering her city and state. In the event that I've heard several of you mention, I definitely need and want to stay in Northeast Ohio, or you have other sort of allegiance to the Cleveland area. But even then, I would encourage you to have either Cleveland or Akron versus putting in your individual city. The reason for that is and this is a little bit very Ohio specific. We do a lot of work, and I know that many of the advisors also speak with a lot of HR professionals in the area and recruiters. There's a bit of a habit here in Northeast Ohio for people to make their own assumptions about a commute someone does or does not want to make. So I have spoken directly, and I'm not saying it's fair, but I've spoken directly with HR folks who say, if I see that someone works in Westlake and my job is down in, I don't know, Twinsburg, I'm going to question whether or not they really want to be driving 45 minutes a day. And if it were me as the job seeker, I want to make that decision about my own commute. I don't want someone deciding that for me. So I would leave the direct city off, and I can choose to put Cleveland, Ohio, if that's going to, help to make sure that I'm getting more residential centric. But the comment in terms of space that someone added, yeah, look at how much wasted white space there is on either side of Mary's kind of postage stamp there. It's not a good use of the real estate of a page. And a resume, which I'll repeat several times, is really about creating clear, compelling content on the real estate you have available. This is a great time to respond to Richard's question earlier around the length of a resume. Okay, so buckle up. Strong feelings here, and this is based on research of what's happening across the, what we see coming through a lot of surveys and results from recruiters. As you've mentioned, back in the day, there used to be like this really hard and fast rule, like you can never have more than 2 pages. And then it was never more than one. And now it was back to 2.5, and then 3 or 4. Here's what it comes down to now. There is no longer a hard and fast rule about the exact number of pages you need to have. However, keep in mind, your content needs to be intentional, clear, concise, and compelling. So if I can tell a story about a 30 plus year executive on a single page, that is what I will do. If you are 3 years out of your graduate degree and already have enough experience in showcasing a variety of different skills to go on to that second page, then go on to that page. And it doesn't need to fill the entire second page. It's best that you not leave just a single inch at the top, because then it looks like you just got lazy about formatting. But you can have a page and a half, that's acceptable. The one caveat I will say is that if you go over 2 pages, you need to know that statistically fewer people will ever get to page 3. So, what I advise clients, a lot of times folks who are coming from academia or from a healthcare background, if you're going to move to page 3, you have to have less relevant content there. And by what I mean by that is make sure your education falls within the first 2 pages. Maybe posters and presentations or different honors and awards can fall onto that third page, but you need to know that all of the important details that you're offering are happening on those first 2 pages to ensure they're going to be read. Okay. And Michael points out a great thing in the chat there, kind of saying it's the same amount of space for both of these headers, but it's just better distributed. And it's actually just because of the way that I screenshotted them. Mary's is taking up more space than that. But yes, same point is that you want your name to be the largest, boldest item on the document so that it's serving as your professional letterhead, if you will. And that same format for your information should also appear on the top of a cover letter, on the top of your reference pages, thank you letters you send, whatever might come out in an actual printed form, so that people are getting used to seeing that and are associating with you and your career. So, okay, enough about headers. Let's get into the good stuff. Executive summary. Okay, can anyone tell? I have somebody, could someone just read the objective on Mary's statement there? Can you see that? I know it's kind of small on the screen, but would anybody willing to read that out loud?
Can I read it and laugh at the same time?
You certainly can, Carol. Yes, please. And also be prepared because I'm going to interrupt you, but go ahead.
To obtain a challenging position in field marketing where my education skills and experience can be
Oh,
highly
okay. We're done with that.
utilized and
I'm done.
later
I'm
be
already
ap-
bored. I'm already bored, Carol.
Right,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, listen, what Carol just shared, thank you very much, Carol, for stepping into a role, is all about Carol. Well, it's all about Mary in this case, right? But an objective statement is incredibly outdated because back in the day when our resumes were just kind of a laundry list of the things that we did and or really just the jobs we held, not even our accomplishments, people had objective statements. And 99% of the time they started with this, like, what I'm looking for is a challenging position. Well, that's great for you, but what a company wants is for you to speak in their language. They need to understand the return on investment you're going to bring them. An objective statement, very client or candidate focused. An executive summary, very focused on the company and what it is you can do to add to their bottom line and make an impact for your company. So every modern resume needs to have an executive summary. Under no circumstance should your resume have an objective. There is not a single reason that there is someone who should have an objective statement on the top of their resume. So that can make a huge impact if you have that. You don't have to raise your hand, but make sure you get rid of it tonight and move yourself toward an executive summary. There's a couple of different features that we see on executive summaries, and I'm actually going to pull up an easier sample to see here. We'll look at a couple of different samples throughout the evening here, but let me grab this so you can see a little bit closer. In the chat, I'm going to share with you a link there so you can access and take a look at these samples well after our conversation today. But can people see the PDF on my screen right now for Mary Nolan?
Yes.
This is obviously an updated version of Mary. But here we can see several different features that can be shown in an executive summary. The first and foremost is that Mary is starting off with a very clear branding line, target line, if you will. So Mary is clearly showcasing that these are the type of positions she is well suited for. It's not necessarily a specific job title, but she is saying, listen, senior field marketing executive, that's the space I play in. And in Mary's case, because it made sense to kind of show some specific details underneath that, she's indicating that her areas of specialization are retail operations, trade marketing, et cetera, et cetera. The next element after a clear target line that's showing people what kind of job you are well suited for, Mary is showcasing what we would consider sort of her value statement, her return on investment. In her case, she's letting you know the number of experiences and what she really brings at the end of the day. She drives sales, growth, and exponential ROI. So I can very clearly get a sense of what things Mary's really great at. Then I see a core competencies listing. This can be titled as key strengths, core qualifications, leadership qualities, however you want to title that section, or not even give it necessarily a title. But this idea of having some keywords right here up front allows the reader to immediately see in a snapshot that you have what it takes to get the job done. And then it's going to encourage them to want to read down the page into your experience section to see what you've been able to create with those skill sets. I'm going to show you a few more examples, but before I move off of Mary, you can see that she also chose to put notable achievements on her resume. Going back to the question that was asked earlier around, what if I've had some really cool stuff happen, but a lot of it was earlier in my career? Pulling forward a career highlights section on page 1 as part of your executive summary. Side note, when I'm saying executive summary, I mean anything below your contact information and above professional experience. Pulling something like a highlights section, career highlights, notable achievements, allowed you to reference things that happen on page 2 or 3 of your resume, but bring them front and center right here for someone to read out the gate. This is often used if you have an incredible accomplishment, such as giant ROI, if you have a really household name, such as Disney, Nike, Google, these days, Snapchat, things of that sort. Those can all be great reasons to use a career achievements or career highlights section within your executive summary. Not all of these sections are necessary. It just allows you to see the different features or options you might have. Let's take a look at another example here. You can see here, Julie, there's a familiar name right there. Again, Julie is a senior finance executive. Then we can see she has chosen to include a little bit of a value statement to let people know what makes her different from all the other candidates they may be interviewing. And then we can see that she's provided a very clear list, again, of those hard skills that relate to the positions that she is targeting. It did not make sense for Julie to showcase her career highlights because the strongest accomplishment she had happened in her most recent or current position. So those were already going to appear on page 1. Okay. I'm going to take a pause to answer some of the questions coming through in the chat while you guys take a look at this document. Michael, do you repeat the highlights later in the resume? It is in fact a summary, which means if you're going to comment on some type of highlight, yes, you're going to want to reference it a little bit later on. Would encourage you to kind of take a look here. Again, if she's referenced her Disney Pixar, I'm sure that if we went all the way down, I would be able to see like, oh, look at that. She spent some time in this organization. So I wouldn't see a word for word repeat of that highlight, but I would definitely be able to find reference to that information, even if it was just telling me the company that she worked for later in the resume. Issues with ATS related to columns, yes. Some ATS systems, they're still not advanced enough to handle things that are outside of the standard Microsoft Word document, but there are really simple ways to get around that. The resume you're looking at on the screen now, including this finance one, those are actually created with stop tabs. It is not 2 separate columns. They are stop tabs. I'll type that into the chat. And you could watch a 2-minute, possibly shorter video on Google on how to make stop tabs in Microsoft Word. Essentially, any information seen inside of a text box will almost definitely not be seen by an ATS. Information within columns will be seen, but we can't always guarantee the order that it will come through. So for something like a keyword listing, the order isn't as critical, so you could almost get away with it. But I feel I tend to communicate to people, it's just best that you not include those type of formats within the document anyhow, so you guarantee that it's coming across as you'd like. Question around whether or not the ATS can read PDF documents. Certain ones can, absolutely. It's advised if you're applying to a position through a company website or even LinkedIn, and they request that you upload your resume, that you do so with a PDF document. If you are emailing your resume directly to an individual and you've been given the email address, you also want to use a PDF. But there are times that different companies or circumstances will specifically ask for a Microsoft Word document, in which case you need to follow their directions and give them what they want. Okay, let's see. Questions. If you have over 20 years, with ageism, do you list it? So great question, Michael. So if you look at some of these samples, notice how we handle this. So in this case, Mary has quite a bit of experience. In fact, her current company took her all the way back to 1992. So as to not draw more attention to how long ago Mary graduated, we simply included this line at the bottom that said additional experience as an account executive for Pepsi. So what we're doing here is sort of referencing, hey, I had a career or jobs prior to 92, but you and I both know that was so long ago, we don't need to get into the details here, right? So this is very common, even for folks that are just trying to reference work that happened. That's not on that one. Let's see. Even trying to reference work that happened more than 10 to 15 years in the past. Here's another example, right? Just saying prior experience with. So generally speaking, and there are certainly outliers to this rule, but generally speaking, your resume does not need to reflect more than the last 10 to 15 years of your career. Again, there can be compelling reasons if it supports your target for you to include additional information. But if it's just about making sure you're kind of closing a gap to show that something did happen before this, but you don't want to go into a lot of detail, having one of these lines at the end that will just say prior experience with such and such and such and such allows you to reference those earlier career jobs without giving specific dates and immediately aging yourself. And I'm also seeing Barry asked a question about the color of shadings or shading color on the resume. Let's say that. So again, the use of color is very much encouraged. It does not throw off the ATS system. Color nowadays on a resume is seen the same as bold, underline, and italicized, which means that it is being used to draw attention, the reader's attention towards something. That is to say, you don't want to include random bolding throughout the document. You don't want to have too much bold, underline, italicized, or it's going to cause the reader's eye to go a little bit haywire, right? You want to be intentional about what you're choosing to draw attention to, and you can do that nowadays with color as well. It is typically recommended that you stay within your industry's level of risk. So another way of saying that is, if I was in finance, I'm going to stick with a very, so we're going to look conservative colors. I'm going to stick with blue, green, black. I'm going to stay very, here. In this case, Mary's in marketing. So purple made sense for her to kind of stand out and show a bit of that personality. And again, because this information is done with stop tabs, I'm also not using a table to create those colors. It's being done within the document itself. Okay. I am going to get back to the slides here. Please repeat a question in the chat if I didn't just respond to the question. I think I just grabbed everything that folks were referencing there, but feel free to throw it back in if I missed something there as we were talking through executive summaries. Or again, you can come off of mute there. Maybe I'll answer it quickly. Okay. Applying for roles with graphic design aspects, having a logo. Oh, I'm going to wait until you answer that. Yes, Michael. Oh, okay, Michael,
Yes, you
should
got
it
it,
include a
logo.
logo? Yes. Yes, you can. Know that it likely won't go through the ATS software.
Yes,
So
but it won't derail anything.
you are correct. Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so keywords. So this is the secret to ACS, Applicant Tracking Software Systems, which is that these systems are driven by keywords. One of the primary things that that everyone needs to understand, and even as resume writers, we need to remind ourselves, is that no one can predict which keywords are going to be used 100% of the time, because the keywords are very much driven by, it's sort of that old adage of information in, information out. Inside of the same company, let's talk Google. Even within Google, the same exact position, let's say a data analyst 2, in the same city and state, can potentially have two separate set of ATS directions because it is driven based upon the HR representative that loaded the information into the system. This is what's commonly happening, right? There's certainly outliers. So because two different HR reps could interpret how something is coming through or what that particular hiring manager wants, or two different hiring managers wrote two slightly different job descriptions, there is no way to foolproof predict how the ATS system will react. What we can do is guesstimate with about an 80% of the rule, right? So we often say like 80% of the time, we know this will happen and work through the system. One of the fastest ways you can identify how to hit that 80% is and I appreciate that many of us like to work on a screen. I still occasionally kill trees and print things out. That's how my brain functions. But if I were looking for a job, let's see, in software development, I would go on to Indeed, on LinkedIn, wherever I want to be, and I would pull off 3 different job descriptions that were all symbolic and relevant to the job that I truly wanted. These are all jobs I would go after. They're all in the same field. I'm interested in all 3 of these descriptions. I would print the 3 of them out. I would take a highlighter and go through and highlight those words that seemed very relevant or related to hard skills, similar to what you see here on the screen. Obviously, it would be different for software development, but really picking out the kind of words that I have heard again and again in my job that were probably in the job description when I went after this job in the first place. Probably terms that have been on my performance evaluations for years. I would highlight those terms on all three job descriptions. And I promise you, you will see repeated terms again and again across each one of those documents. Those are the hard skills that the ATS system is going to be built around. For those who are comfortable using AI and have started to get into that space, this is a great use of AI. Can AI produce a strong resume for you? No, not unless you know the right direction to give it and information to offer it and all of the different rules and nuances. It's not going to be a great way to get a resume, but it can absolutely give you some really great insight as to the hard skills, the keywords that are relevant to your positions of choice. Meaning, I could take those three job descriptions, load them into, for example, ChatGPT, and say, you tell me which critical skills are coming or are in common across these boards, or that you see in all positions posted on such and such day for this field. And it's going to spit those out to you. So identifying those keywords and not just including them in your core competencies or strengths section, but rather including them throughout the document. I mentioned earlier that the flaw with changing your resume is that most people will only change this signature strength section. But as you can see, as you can see a little bit further down, there are other highlighted areas wherein we are incorporating keywords within context. That's what really ranks on the ATS, is not only that it sees the word strategic planning, but that it sees it surrounded by information that is relevant and showcases an accomplishment. That boosts the number of points you're receiving and therefore moving through the system. So I can certainly game, and get different points by changing up the signature strength section, but that's not going to necessarily reap the rewards if there's nothing that is reflective of that below in the rest of the document. So this screen is really intended to show you how many different places, just in a short space of the resume, that you would see keywords that would be popping out and moving through the system. Michael in the chat says that a few days ago he applied for a job where the keyword jargon uses specific industry. I'm sorry, I'm reading that too fast. Apply for a job where the description keyword jargon use different specific industry jargon words in the questions in their online application. Yeah. So industry jargon is a great sort of thing to consider as well, depending on what you're in. And it's really about looking through those job descriptions and seeing again and again what you see repeated. This is also speaking to a question asked earlier around, I was in the digital marketing space. Now I want to move into IT help desk. How do I showcase that? Understanding the key strengths or keywords or hard skills, I'm using those words synonymously, that relate to both fields, right? So you cannot, nor should you, change the history you've had in your job. When I used to work in healthcare, and then I moved into doing the kind of career services I do now. I couldn't change the fact that I was in healthcare. And in fact, I had some really great accomplishments in that space, but I could change the way I told the story and the words I chose to tell it with. So for example, problem solving, very similar in both spaces. Customer service or having a customer centric mind, very similar in both digital marketing as well as the IT help desk space, right? Being able to go after issue resolution, being able to collaborate, being able to build your team, whatever the case may be. Those are examples of skills that are very related in both spaces. So focusing your resume on those transferable skills and on successes that even though we're in a different industry or working for different companies before your new education, can help the employer to kind of connect the dots and understand this individual was great in problem solving over here. So I can assume that with their new education in IT, they're also going to be great in problem solving over here. Make sense? Okay. Speaking of accomplishments, this is one of the biggest things that we see people struggle with when they're crafting their own resume. And I will say that the Hudson advisors do such an amazing job of helping people kind of move through this process. You cannot simply list your job responsibilities in your resume, okay? That's not going to cut it. It's certainly not going to put you at the top of the stack. What you need are outcome-based achievements. So these are the bullet points I'm talking about underneath your professional experience. And the trick is, don't tell me, I need you to show me. So that is, don't just give me the list of things that you were asked to do. Like, well, I'm supposed to answer the phone and I'm supposed to manage special projects and I have to do timekeeping. A general trigger is if the word responsible for is anywhere on your resume, I'm going to suggest you remove that and place it with an outcome-based achievement. Because telling me you are responsible for something is not the same as telling me that you do it, right? Once upon a time, I was responsible for putting my kids to bed at a reasonable time. Doesn't mean I did it every night. It was just something I was responsible for, right? Take ownership over the great things that you have done by being really, really clear on how it is that you created work. Tanya's asking if you have access to these slides. You will not, but you're more than welcome to screenshot what you see on your screen right now. And I think, Michael, does Hudson still record these sessions?
Yes.
We do.
Okay. So you're welcome to go back to the sessions as well, Tanya. Okay, so we move from, in the way that you go from, here's my job responsibilities to outcome-based achievements is showcased a little bit on this table. And the trick that I will offer you is the 4 hows. I want you for any time, and we're going to go through an example of this here, any time that you are crafting an accomplishment-based statement, you can think of something you were asked to do, such as, well, I'm responsible for answering the phones. Great. Then ask yourself the 4 how questions. How much? How many? How long? Oops, I clicked. And how often? Just do those in the chat. How much? How many? How long? And how often? So if I have a resume that's full of just my job responsibilities and I need to create accomplishment statements, I'm going to think of each piece. Okay, answer the phone. How many calls did I take? Well, 20 plus a day. Okay, great. Well, and I just gave the how often? Every day, right? So on a daily basis. And if there's some other quantifiable indicator there, like maintaining the 98% service rating, great. That's fantastic. Not all 4 of those questions will apply to all of the responsibilities that you've held, but it helps you start thinking about those quantifiable indicators in ways that are beyond money. Notice that of all the quantifiers that you see on the screen on that right-hand column, only one of them is dollar driven. A lot of times folks will say like, well, I can't have anything quantifiable. I'm not in sales. I assure you there are all kinds of quantifiers indicating the percentage of satisfaction, the percentage of deliverables, the amount of time something happened, the quantity of something that took place, the frequency that it took place, the number of people that are involved, the number of clients that are involved. All of those things are a great way to include quantifiers on your document. Michael, I see your question in the chat. Would you be willing to give me an example of an accomplishment that is not numerically quantifiable so I can help you think it through?
So a lot of the work that I did, so for AT&T, I was on like an emerging technologies instructional design team. So we created a lot of training that like part of the problem was that we couldn't, as a team, fight a lot of numbers for like return on investment because it really
Sure.
was like a lot of indirect results of what we did that the company overall sort of like was everything was working smoothly. People kind of knew where the company was going, but it
Mhm.
wasn't so tightly like my supervisor would always be asked to provide stuff and she's like, we can't. But
Sure.
it's like
So,
the client groups are like love what we do and people
sure.
like things are running smoothly. So that would be
Yeah,
one
so
example.
don't get, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate what the leadership team sounds like they were asking for, and that they wanted to understand, like, give me that direct bottom line number. Be careful or understand that your accomplishments and quantifiers on a resume don't have to speak directly to that bottom line. They will actually, and that's a different topic altogether. But think about ways to quantify it. That's not necessarily what that top executive needs to see at the end of the day. Meaning, you mentioned we did a lot of trainings. Well, I would want to know how many. How often did you do these trainings? For how many clients were they done? How long did you work on a particular project? Is there a way to give a descriptor to the clients? Like, did you do it for a big name client, for a client that had an excess of $100 million in revenue, for a single client that was like in the top business unit of what you were working with? Was it, when you go back to the amount, was the training a 3-hour training? Was it a 4-day training? Was it then dispersed to an entire enterprise or just one department unit? So thinking about ways to quantify the actual work that was happening versus always, again, I understand what that company was asking for and why your boss was struggling with it. but there are ways to still include quantifiers on the resume itself that aren't necessarily leading to this is how much money the company made as a result. And very quickly, I'll add this. Part of the reason we put those quantifiers is not just to say, like, this was my bottom line impact. I made $100,000 for the company. It's allowing the reader of the document, the potential hiring manager, to measure scope, right? Because again, if we go back to the phone example, if I need you to come to my company and answer 15 calls a day, I can comfortably know that you're going to be able to handle that work based on what I'm seeing on your resume. If I need you to answer 100, now I need to ask some different questions during the interview, right? And so it allows someone to understand if you were doing this work in this setting, I can assume you can do similar work in my setting that would be comparable. So it's also to provide the hiring manager, the reader of your resume, with some sense of that scope. It's not just about saying, like, this is how much money I kept making over and over again for the company, for example.
And from what
Even
you're
in a
that help,
saying,
training
I
Michael?
think
session,
scope might even be something that is not necessarily numerical, but gives a sense of range and whatever that is, but just
I don't
something that
disagree.
defines scope.
I don't disagree. Yes. And I'm sorry, there was
Okay.
someone else was jumping on there as
Thank you.
well.
Sorry.
even in a
course.
training session, I've conducted training sessions, and there's always a way to provide some kind of a measure or some kind of a marker for how well you did. I conducted training sessions for salespeople at sales kickoffs around the country, and lo and behold, in the next 2 weeks after the training session, sales reps, their participation in the program jumped like 75%. Use that number.
Sure.
They
And
want to
then,
know, are you having an impact or are you just showing up every day?
and let me speak to this as well. A lot of times people will come across like, well, I don't have the data from 10 years ago, or I don't know the exact numbers, or how do I get to a number if I'm not entirely sure exactly what it is? I don't want to misquote. Make the best educated guess that you can. And I would, if I ask someone like, can you have this, can you have 500 on your resume if that's the number they came to? As long as if we were in an interview setting, you can defend that 500 number. Like, how did you know it was 500 clients? Well, I had our metrics written out. I still have the KPIs from that company. Or, I didn't have an exact figure, but I calculated that we did about 50 of those churns every year, and we had 100 companies, so I know it was, or excuse me, 10 companies, so I know it was about 500 a year. As long as you can confidently speak to that number in an interview, then you can put the number on your resume. Do make sure that you are never exaggerating the number for no reason. And you're going to see this coming up on a slide here shortly. There is you've had amazing accomplishments, every one of you. I promise you that. I believe in you. Accurately reflect the work that you've done. So if you're really unclear of the number, you're going to want to aim low and again, be able to over defend that number in an interview if you don't have the exact specifics. Danielle asked, is there a suggested ratio of quantitative achievements to qualitative throughout the entirety of the resume, including the bullet lists under each job experience? So the bullet points are where your quantitative, all of your achievements should be falling. Okay, so if it's a bullet point, it should be an accomplishment. And I'll bring back up one of these resumes as the example. So all of your bullet points should be falling in as an achievement. Every one of these is written, and you can see a lot of numbers here as an achievement statement. So all of those should appear. And the idea is that you're not offering information in a bullet point that does not reflect some form of an outcome. Meaning it needs to have a quantitative amount to it and or a very clear qualitative achievement. If it is simply referencing something you did or were responsible for, it likely belongs as a scope statement, which is not a bullet point, up below your actual job title. So in this case, the individual led the strategy, development, and execution of marketing initiatives. If they were to say of 20 marketing initiatives every year, then that would be a bullet point. But because it's just simply stating kind of the general scope of their work, then that's falling up underneath the title. In terms of the number of bullet points, this somewhat speaks to the number of pages, which is that we need to be conscious that the most recent study, and this is one of the most depressing statistics ever, is that we all have an attention span less than that of a goldfish these days, right? So we need to be conscious that when individuals are reading our documents, they will lose interest quickly. And the way that we know from like sort of the psychology of resume and the way people digest information is that we typically suggest you never have more than 3 to 5 bullet points in one list, because statistically we know the readers are unlikely to move past the 5th bullet point. They will just jump to the next list. And I would challenge you the next time you're scrolling through your phone to count the number of lines you read in a paragraph before you just jump to the next paragraph without reading the rest of it, right? So what you see on the screen right in front of you is a great example of a way that we were able to incorporate additional details without exceeding that bullet point number, right? Because in this list, there's actually some mini sub lists that allow us to incorporate more information without overwhelming the reader's eye. So generally speaking, from a bullet point perspective, for your most recent or current experience, you should have approximately 4 to 5 bullet points. Again, not a hard, fast rule, just an example. Previous experience to that, maybe 3 to 4. And when you get back to anything that has happened more than 10 years ago, should not have more than 2 bullet points representing that information. Okay. All right, just a few more slides, and then I will go to all remaining questions, because these last few slides are just good reminders for everybody. This is a photo of my dog, Jeffrey. It belongs here on the slideshow because it makes everyone smile when we're almost finished, but it does not belong on your resume, nor does a picture of your beautiful face, Michael Polovic, because photos do not belong in resumes. I haven't seen a study since COVID, but prior to COVID, there was a study that was done, I think by JobBite, and they found that 84% of resumes with a photo were put in the no pile automatically. So a photo belongs on LinkedIn. It does not belong on your resume unless you're going after a Broadway show, okay? You want to make sure that you're eliminating any useless detail on the resume. So we don't include like dates of our children's birth or our height and weight, or even jobs that may have been in the past but are absolutely not necessary. Danielle, you would not include a picture on your cover letter either. Okay, do not include photos. There's also just these days a lot more issues with just the legality of making sure we're hiring equitable, all that good stuff. So do not include a photo of yourself. So don't include useless information that is not relevant to your target. And that applies to being selective with your prior roles. Once upon a time, and I know you're all going to be jealous, I used to work at Subway as a sandwich artist, right? Believe it or not, that doesn't fall on my resume. You know why? Because it has very little to do with what I do today. So despite the fact that it was a number of years ago, it also has nothing to do with what I do today. So I don't put that on my resume. And then also location is to let you know that you want to be thinking, is this on the next slide here? Let me see. You want to be thinking about visual appeal, which is to make sure that you're helping the reader's eye move through the page. This is intended to be so small. Well, it wasn't intended to go off. Intended to be so small, you kind of can't read it. But notice that you can just immediately tell some things about this. Like, first of all, I don't know why Joseph is so excited he lives on Main Street, but that's not a good use of font or white space by making everyone look at his address, right? And look how much white space unnecessarily he has underneath accomplishments. It immediately subconsciously, as the reader, gives you the sense that he didn't have enough information there, so he pushed it all indented, right? And we notice there's a lot of bolding and underlining, and it seems to be kind of sporadic. He's using miscellaneous bullet points. This is very poor formatting. And the reason you saw it disappear is because the slide is set to automatically disappear after 6 seconds, because we've all heard the statistic that a recruiter on average will not spend more than 6 seconds reading your document. So if you can't pull them in with easy to follow visual appeal, you're not going to last through. I talked a little bit earlier about the need to not continually touch your document because you're more likely to have errors. I cannot express this enough, folks. You want to leverage the technology that's available to you and also the resources. So if that technology is using AI, if that technology is using Grammarly, if that technology is using non-technology, is using the colleagues and peers you have in networking groups like these, please proofread your resume and then proofread it again and then use the buddy system and have that person proofread it. Some of the most common typos that we see, but certainly not all of them, are listed here on the screen. The first one says Masters of Science. Listen, when you receive your degree, you become a master or a bachelor. You are a master of science. Unless you have 2 master's degree, you do not have masters of science. It would be masters apostrophe. Is that the right word? It's apostrophe, right? Am I thinking the right grammar? Master apostrophe S degree, because it is you are the master and you own the degree, but you do not have plural masters, okay? The reason the August is showcased there is because you'll notice it's a different formatting than the one below. So you want to keep consistent formatting in your dates. The one below for Nashville has 2011 with a dash to 2013. And then above, I'm using the word to represent that dash. We also see homophones, which are words like principal that are spelled differently, No, that's not homophones. Excuse me. Words like there, which are spelled differently and can mean different things. And then there's a lot of times people randomly capitalize things. We find that a lot, and I'm not entirely sure why. So these are just some quick reminders, examples. But and my goodness, manger is not going to get caught by the by your spell check, right? You have to be aware, and you have to have other people with fresh eyes taking a look at it for you. Okay, rounding it out, my last tip. Your resume is a true and accurate reflection of you, and it needs to be written as such. This is one of the biggest reasons that I tell you you cannot use AI to write your resume. You can use AI to get ideas for your resume, to improve and boost your bullet points, to ask questions about how you might move or what kind of questions and prompts it can take you to have go from the job description over to the accomplishment-based bullet points. There's a lot of great ways to leverage it. But you cannot simply have a computer write your resume and expect it to translate for you because you need to be a human being. And sooner or later, when you make it to the interview, they're going to expect the human being to sound like the person who wrote the resume. And it's important that those two people resonate the same way. This also needs to come across on your LinkedIn profile, right? So it needs to be written in your true voice. You never want to falsify information. I promise they will figure it out. The analogy I always make is like when my kids were little and my son would come in the room and have chocolate over his face. And I'm like, Matt, did you get into the candy bowl? And he's like, no. And you're like, okay. That's how obvious it is to HR folks when you come into an interview and you have clearly falsified information on your resume. We can tell very quickly, those of us that look at documents like this all day, things like that stand out quite a bit. And there's no need to. You can create incredibly impactful accomplishment statements with all of the true things you have already done. There's not a need to exaggerate beyond that. Okay, so some of these are the best. This is kind of a recap of the things we've covered today. There's some information on how you can contact me, but I have about 5 minutes for questions. Michael, can I have 5 more minutes?
You're gonna have 5 more minutes.
Excellent. So I have 5 minutes. Let's see if there are 2 questions I can answer in those 5 minutes. Who has the first question? Richard is asking, cover letters, he reads them, he asked himself, do people really write that way? No, they do not, Richard. That's exactly why you can't use chat for things like that. You can use it as a starting point or as to improve things at the end, but it certainly cannot be the sole source of such information. Who has a question? Either something I didn't cover or something I did and you just want a little bit more detail on it.
I have a question about the latter, and it is kind of an expansion on my question from earlier. Just about, you mentioned being more specific with your keywords and not changing them, and like with your job search as well. For something like for the jobs I'm looking for within marketing strategy, it feels like a lot of different companies are asking for different specific experience, whether that's like email experience or SEO, SEM, or website design. And this is more specific to my specific role, but I feel like that's the same for a lot of different industries and roles as well, where there's those generalized keywords you could use or more specific ones for the specific role that they're looking for. What would you suggest there? Would you maintain the general things or somehow include those more specific things throughout your resume?
Sure. So the example I would direct your energy to, Danielle, is this is on that same sample page. It's a pre-sales. So not necessarily these words, but in this case, you can see how we've sort of represented both leadership and technical competencies. So we're showing those hard skills that should be seen across, but we're also calling out some very specific software or specific skill sets that might come up from one company to the next. In this case, we've chosen to put it in the executive summary. This same information could potentially appear all the way down under your education. You can have sort of education and technical skills as your final section and include those skills down there. It's really a matter of preference. But this is an example on this page of a way that you can incorporate that information in addition to the hard skills. I would say the short answer is that the hard skills have to be the gateway, because without those, you're not the higher level skills. You're not even going to get in for them to be able to see that you have some of those specific technical pieces that are needed. Okay. Great. And then I saw our final question come across. Any advice on switching from an academic CV to a resume? Yes, Tanya. You want to make sure that you're using corporate speak. So this is a great example. Like I would absolutely upload my resume into AI and say, listen, I need to have this speaking to a more corporate audience. Can you give me some examples or point out sections that are more academic in nature? Some of the biggest differences we see between those two things is the length of resume. Again, do not have a 5-page resume. No one's going to look at that. It's not going to be read, right? You want it clear, concise, compelling. So make sure that information is being presented in the most useful way possible. We see that people in academia tend to put their education credentials before professional experience. The opposite is true in the corporate space. Your order of events should be contact information, executive summary, professional experience, and then education. The only time that is not true is if you just received a degree and have never had paid work experience. And even then, sometimes we work around it so that that's not the case. And then just in general, academic, depending on what area of academia, tends to have more lengthy bullet points. And again, we want to be clear, concise, and compelling. We want someone to be able to scan the document and get all of those good nuggets versus having to read an entire sort of diary of all the things that you've done. So that would be the best way to switch through. I'm actually going to answer the last question that I know I just said I finished. My last comment here, Ed is saying, is there a way, or the recommended tools to check your resume is formatted well? Yes. So please try to avoid tools like JobScan. They are going to force you into the position Michael was talking earlier about how you're going to start tweaking your resume for every single job posting, and it's a complete waste of time. What you can do is take your existing resume and save it as a .txt file. Or take your PDF and save it as a Word file and then just open it up. And whatever you're seeing on the screen is what they're going to see when they come through the system. So if you've uploaded a PDF and you just save it as Word, as we all know, a lot of times when you're exporting that out, things don't always come across in exactly the right formatting. That is what ATS will see. Or if you have uploaded a Word document and you then save it as a text file, opening that file is what the computer or the robot is going to see. So that's a good way to kind of check compatibility there. If you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Again, feel free to reach out to me this evening, and I will go ahead and accept your request without a special note. But hope this was helpful. Hope to hear from all of you in the future, and I will pass things back over to Michael. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. Let's a nice round of applause
Thanks,
to Chris.
Chris.
I mean, that's just an outstanding presentation as always. And you heard her say earlier that she didn't drink Mountain Dew before a presentation, but I don't
Smart
know
water.
how that woman gets that energy. No, how you get that kind of energy this late in the evening, I don't know. But